In order to educate the children properly, we must separate them from their families. Some people may say that this is hard, but if we want to civilize them, we must do that. A federal cabinet minister, 1883.
I remember them taking me away from my mother and my stepfather. And I can hear them telling my mom that that was the best thing for me, you know, and that not to worry, I would be looked after.
Our parents didn't want to worry us unduly and tell us and warn us that we are going to be separated for a long, long time with barely a visit.
I see him come around, Indian agent in a boat with the principal, then collect some children from the reserve. Mm-hmm. Then he would come back again, come and take some more.
So the next day, I woke up with hundreds of total strangers, my size, my age, and not knowing, you know, what are they doing with all of us here? Why are there's so many of us here, you know? And that's where a lot of my whole life really started to change, because I got strapped. I got beaten up for speaking my own native tongue. I even had my tongue pulled out and pinched, you know.
My strongest memory there is when the little girl died beside me. She must have been about 6. I was scared why the parents were not there. That's what I was scared about. And I knew they wouldn't feel comfortable for not being there when their daughter is dying.
And do you know why they weren't there?
They were never notified.
Indian children in the residential schools die at a much higher rate than in their villages. But this does not justify a change in the policy of this department, which is geared towards a final solution of our Indian problem. Duncan Campbell Scott, Deputy Superintendent of Indian Affairs.
Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland, 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 Dixieland. Praise from rally, for this is the time and place, the international idea.
Oh, I'm Tyler. Shut that bitch up. All right, y'all. Thank you for tuning in to Dixieland the Proletariat. We're going to talk about Southern working class history and really depressing shit through a leftist perspective. Make sure to like us on social media at Dixieland the Proletariat, or find all our links at our link tree at linktree/DixieProl, where if you want to give your wages to a bunch of rednecks, you'll find a link to our Patreon. We got cool stuff to give you, including CDs, stickers, a cookbook, Discord server, Twitch stream, and exclusive episodes. We also have a Spotify playlist with some great artists you all should check out, as well as our merch store. Oh crap! I didn't say what we didn't have a thing about what the show is going to be sponsored by, so it's
sponsored by Justin Trudeau himself.
Hell yeah! This podcast is brought to you by Contractual Monogamy, Therapy, Vaping, Living at Home, Modelo, Kiaza Pushing White Men in the Swamps, Tommy's Herbal Clinic, Nelson's Love Life, Tyler's Wild Stories, and what Kai said about Justin Trudeau actually being Fidel Castro's son. Shout out to our new Patreon subscribers. We don't have any new ones since the last time we recorded. Our monthly Patreon surplus goes to groups that are run by and or help marginalized people directly. As always, I'm Tyler with...
I can't get this beer open.
Our new host cannot get this beer open.
And I'm just fucking done with y'all to begin with.
I'm really struggling right now.
All right, real quick.
This lighter.
Okay. Let me front load this show by saying that the majority of this episode is going to be really, really triggering, really, really depressing. If you can't take any, I'm going to do a trigger warning when I start talking, but if you can't take any of that stuff, at least sit for like the 15 minutes that we're able to be funny. And then I'll clearly post when we're getting into the worst shit. So let's talk about some ridiculous shit first.
Right. So 2 things, right? I've had a Britney Spears moment, and I've actually decided, you can't really see it because it's not growing in that much, but I just shaved like the top part of my head, and I have the monk ring going around the side because I want to look like what it would be like if I looked like I was 40 going bald instead of 30.
What the fuck? My dude, what the fuck?
I want to look like Bill. I'm going to try to look like Artie Bucco or like
Why?
Bill Dotre. I don't know.
Why?
I was just like, I'm just going to do this because I'm sad.
I've heard that like men who shave their faces often will shave it into different shapes to see what it looks like. I've never seen that, but I've never like experienced somebody actually doing something like this. It's like people
really
that are like researching chimps in a zoo. Oh, he's displaying the behavior.
I did trim the beard because I want parts of it to grow in thicker, which it is. So like I kind of touched up a bit, trying not to make it look like a chin strap, but an actual like thing, and I'll let it grow in eventually. But what was I gonna say? Oh yeah. So while Tommy's away, Kai, one time I have in the past told my therapist about the podcast. And I told my therapist about how Tommy is insufferable sometimes and doesn't understand boundaries. And she said that anytime that someone doesn't understand boundaries, it's like they're having a temper tantrum, like they're a child. So now every time Tommy does it, I picture him as like a giant adult baby with like a diaper and like crying and having a temper tantrum, like, wow, I want this. But no, it backfires because I get really sad and I want to like hold Tommy and give him the love that he was denied as a baby and just tell him it's going to be okay and just hold him and give him a bottle and tell him it's going to be fine.
Isn't that nice? Because he's just got back.
I'm gonna be honest. I didn't hear any of the racist shit.
Yeah, Nelson, infantilizing him because of his race.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's definitely it. What did we say was there something in the group chat about us being on the airboat and Tommy was pissed and saying something dumb and you were like, I'm gonna throw him in the I'm gonna
fucking kill him.
Yeah, I'm gonna throw him in the Gators. And I'm like, Kai, I know that you're also a marginalized person, but what you said is very racist because they actually used to, according to random websites, they actually did used to feed black babies to alligators. So what you just said about throwing Tommy to alligators is racist.
Like
so,
they didn't do that to Indian babies.
As a white man, I know what's racist and what's not.
Oh, Nelson, I cannot wait to read this entire 13 pages worth of notes that I have on this.
I'm not Canadian.
Oh, but it has a perfect reference to the American side. So
I thought you were gonna find like the whole one like Italian residential school. It is the Catholic Church, and you can't really strip the Catholic Church away from Italy. So
what were you saying about me?
Oh, nothing. You just have to listen to it when you edit the episode. And
you will like 4 times.
Yeah, and then when you try to trick me with fucking throwing shit in the fucking episodes. By the way, Tommy, I listened to the After Dark and I totally shut the fuck up. I totally forgot about the Italian boy bit. And I was wondering, you always say you want to make a video. What if we actually, me and you dressed up like stereotypical like Italians and did like, I'm an Italian boy, and just like come up with like an Italian boy rap instead of an island boy. And I'll spill like actual pizza sauce on my shirt, get like a fake gold chain and be like, I'm an Italian boy. I got sauce on my shirt.
What are you referencing when you said hitting stuff in the track? What are you talking about?
I don't know. Just, funny things that you hide in episodes,
What did I hide? I'm not sure what you're talking about.
I don't, you know what? I think I'm having a depressive episode. I think I'm just projecting on you right now. I don't think what I'm saying. I have imposter syndrome. I don't think that
you're an imposter about your own fucking show. I'm not really doing this.
I'm not really doing this. I've had this recurring nightmare because of the stress of school that I have this recurring nightmare that I have an irrational fear of like dilapidated structures, especially wooden ones that are like rotted and like rusted shipwrecks that stick out of the ground. I don't know why. I just have an irrational fear of this stuff. So like
wait, like a fear like of the entire thing or being in it, or
I don't know. I see it and I just have an irrational fear of like I give so the recurring nightmare, I hate like dilapidated wooden structures, especially like moldy, like run down, just like buckled floors and things like that. I don't know why. I just have a recurring nightmare that I'm in one of those buildings and the floors have like separated from the walls and I'm getting sucked into that space. And it's like I'm going to get keel hauled by this fucking building. That's my life.
You hear him get choked up about it?
No, I had McDonald's and it's
oh no. I have maximum 45 minutes to record this episode now.
Oh no, I didn't have any bacon. I promise. And I to our listeners, I went to the bathroom before this, so we're good. But I do want to praise Tommy real quick. I do want to praise Tommy that his predictions were 100% right. Kyle Rittenhouse is wet free, but the dudes who killed him on Aubrey, can't remember their fucking racist ass names, but they're all going to fucking prison. Tommy was right. I was full of doubt, but Tommy was like, "No, man, they're going down." And they're going to go down apparently for they're going back to trial. They're going back to court for civil rights violations. They're going to get more.
Yeah, because Georgia doesn't have hate crime laws, and they just instituted hate crime laws because of this in 2021. There's never been a hate crime ever in Georgia. Never.
Nothing that you could get convicted of.
Reba McEntire is wrong in this case. She said, tonight that they hung an innocent man, but these guys are guilty. So they're going to prison for the rest of their lives. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not a fan of the death penalty, but if they fried those racist fuckers, I wouldn't bet an eye.
Yeah.
I'm talking about they used to call Big Bertha is the fucking chair in Alabama. I don't know what it is in Georgia. They just like fired that thing up and the cobwebs on it just started catching on fire, and they botched it like that shit. Remember in Green Mile? Where Percy doesn't put the fucking sponge on the guy's head, and just fucking. Yeah. Busting the flames. The sponge,
he puts it dry on there.
Fucking looking like Ghost Rider. If that shit happened to them, I wouldn't bat an eye. I'm against the death penalty, except for these guys.
Florida's doesn't even have a chance to get cobwebs on it. Florida's is constantly running.
No one beats Texas, though. Texas, literally, that's why the power grid fails all the time, because they just fucking execute people.
Oh, that's fucking dark. Oh, shit.
We're getting it in early, y'all. We're getting it in early.
They redirected all the power to the chair.
Christ.
We need all the juice we can get, boys.
Do you see the color my face is turning right now? Oh my God. because of this
it's
shit.
Because of the episode. You know what's about to happen. You've gone
Your face is more red than Nelson's neck.
They say redskin is a slur. However, I literally am one.
It's because the episode you're going full indigenous. You're like,
yeah, I've turned red.
All of your dad's side of the
this
family.
This is the rest of my dad right here. Here's my mom on my face.
It's just leaving your body. It's like, I am no longer my father's daughter.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm the indigenous firebrand on here, but I look like an Irish ghost.
My mom's
of Irish ghost.
Oh, yeah.
Has the queen seen her shadow yet?
Oh God, who knows? She's still in the chrysalis stage inside Palace.
Okay. I'm actually missing. So like people on Twitter keep saying she's dead, but so is she like MIA? Like what's actually happened? I don't know.
I don't know because of COVID and everything, and I don't know what the fuck she's doing because I don't get the whole thing that the palace said. But traditionally, for the Christmas time, the family goes to another like grand home that's in the east of the country, and that's where they always spend their Christmases. Sandringham Castle. They usually go there. So I don't know if this is like she's not going to be seen again until after Christmas time, because there's actually like a chapel on the castle grounds, and the people that live in the village, I think, are allowed to go to the chapel on Christmas Day that the Queen goes to and everything. So I don't know if this is like the Queen is not making any Christmas time appearances or anything like that. Or if she's literally wrapped in silk right now in a chrysalis inside one of her. So if she's not in Sandringham, I could only assume that she's at Buckingham Palace. So.
Do you think that she's like wrapped in the cocoon, like surrounded by artifacts that they've stolen from all the museums, like all the colonial countries?
It's her and the Elgin marbles and the Benin bronzes,
and like a bunch of scrolls from the Library of Alexandria, just like a fucking Egyptian mummy, like King Tut's just chilling with her.
It's just full of African and Indian artifacts.
Yeah, she's standing on the Rosetta Stone as we speak.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I don't know what the fuck is happening. If she's dead, oh man, am I going to come on here and celebrate?
Actually,
it'll be the biggest show of the year for me.
We're literally going to stop everything, just have an episode that night or
yes.
whenever the queen does.
I actually watched this documentary about this guy who goes and buys a bunch of like random antiques, and he went to the palace to buy this like mechanical like elephant thing that was from India, and I was like, I wonder how they got this.
Honestly,
I wonder how this came about.
So there's this guy. I went to a couple of his actions in London. I think I've mentioned him before. He's an Indigenous Australian who can prove that the British Museum has his family's artifacts. From the time that Captain Cook sailed into Botany Bay, his family were the ones that were living in that area. Captain Cook's men tendered to the beach, and rather than like talk to any of the people who were on the beach or anything like that, they just fucking shot at them with their rifles. So the people who were on the beach dropped their shit and ran. So there's a few museums that have spears and shields that are legitimately from his family. We's come to the UK several times to try to get them back. The British Museum has tried to claim that he couldn't see them, that they didn't have them, like all these things. They weren't even on display. They finally put them on display, and they're not even like signed. I actually went to the British Museum after they put them on display, and they don't even have like a sign saying what they are. They're just in a room. But when I went to one of his things, they had an entire exhibit about Captain Cook's expedition, kind of up into the Aleutians and all that. So there's a lot of Western Canada, the islands of Alaska, and all those places. There's a lot of artifacts from those places, but it was sponsored by, I think, British Petroleum. I think it was like this oil company is like sponsoring it.
Sponsored by petrol.
Yeah, basically.
British Petroleum, overthrowing government since 1953.
Really, like, it was the most surreal thing to walk in there and see, like, thanks to BP for this exhibition. Like, all of these artifacts that was like, y'all didn't get these like through trade. You stole this shit. Somebody is dead because he wanted this, and it's sponsored by BP. Yay!
Didn't Captain Cook get murked like on his genocide?
Yeah, I don't remember who exactly did it. Was it the Hawaiians?
I think it was the Hawaiians.
The Hawaiians, yeah,
they
murked his ass. They were like, man, fuck this.
He got dead. Yeah.
Apparently, he was there and they were trying to be nice, and he was like, "Nah, fuck you. Let's get just drunk and pillage." And they were like, "What the fuck?"
Yeah.
Then Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson came out and fucking.
If you smell with the rock, and just gave him a rock bottom in the people's elbow and fucking killed Captain Cook. Know your role. Oh man,
I don't even know who the Rock's people are. I know that he's Polynesian, but I don't know which. Maybe he's Maori. I don't know, but yeah. Like Captain Cook was one of the ones that was responsible for saying that all of the like Polynesian and Western Canada, Southern Alaskan people were all cannibals and like all that shit. Like he's the one that started that. And then he got done by those people. So.
He got.
Hopefully he got 8.
Oh, yeah.
I will raise the cup to that.
I'll show you what a true cannibal is.
Well, if we want to talk about killing our colonizers, Juan Ponce de Leon was done in by a poisoned dart by the Calusa in southern Florida that was shot into his ass. He died 2 days after he got it. He got shot in the ass and keeled over.
Got.
Yep.
Now he's buried under Disney World.
God. Too bad they didn't do like what they did to Nelson and just like roll his body up and stick him in a barrel of brandy.
I know,
Take
right?
him back. fucking pickled him, took him back to Spain or Portugal, whichever one he was from.
Toss him in the river.
No, that was that was a British admiral, right? Didn't he defeat Napoleon?
Yeah, Nelson.
Yeah, me. And then
we have a whole like Nelson's column, all that stuff in London.
There's the Lord Nelson is the Trafalgar Square, right? Is a big statue.
Yep. I was just there a couple of weeks ago. I think I sent pictures of it.
And then like he got killed during the battle and they didn't lower his flag. So the sailors had the morale to defeat the French. Woo!
And then they rolled his body up and put him in a barrel of brandy.
Some brandy. Fucking
Pickled Nelson.
That sounds like a drink. Somebody needs to come up with that drink.
Nelson.
It's got to have a base of brandy to it.
It's just turds. That's it.
It's McDonald's bacon.
It's sour turds.
Oh god! It's brandy with a salt rim and a slice of candied bacon on the side.
And
it's green, like when you eat like Captain Crunch berries.
Oh my god!
Yeah.
The rim is marinara sauce and salt. It's like a Bloody Mary.
When you take the cup away from your face, you look like fucking the Joker.
Oh my god! Yes.
This is called Nelson's Joker moment.
Oh man. Shit.
Enjoy the laughter while you can, fuckers.
I know, right? God. Oh man, it's gonna get dark.
Anything else to cover? Oh yeah, Tyler isn't here because anybody didn't notice.
Hey man, I'm here. I'm here right here. Tyler, you know this computer done did updated like the Windows 8.2. I don't know what I'm doing.
Tyler's probably having to go to the emergency room as we speak because U.S. medical coverage doesn't cover your luxury bones in your mouth.
Fucking yeah.
Neither does the NHS, right? The NHS doesn't.
There are spaces for NHS dentists, but there's not a lot. I have a private dentist, so.
But how much does it cost to go to the dentist in the UK?
It's still like pricey, but I've never had anything done that made me go like, oh shit. Okay. So I couldn't really tell you.
I was able to get dental insurance through the exchange for $10 a month. Like cheapest one they had was like $10 a month. I think it was Humana, right? But like I looked up and there was no dentists in a 50-mile radius that took my insurance.
The only thing they cover is literally a pair of pliers on your tooth and yanking. That's it.
It's like, I was like, what am I going to fucking drive to Birmingham? I was like, if I have to drive to Birmingham at that point, I'm just going to go to the UAB dental school and have them fucking do it for like $50. That's like, that literally, the UAB's dental program is probably the number one dental provider like in 100-mile radius for dental care because you can go and get like a root canal, your wisdom teeth pulled for like $50, like a sliding scale, but it's done by a dental student. And like, granted, they're being observed and that they're doing the residency, but like, you gotta, you pull and pray. So that type of thing.
Fix that shit. Fix
it. Your luxury bones and your luxury eyes, none of it covered by medical anything.
Yeah.
Which is great for me when I have a prescription that changes every 2 years.
I am not looking forward to getting fucked on my tax bill because of Obamacare and how that shit works. But that's for another time. Do we want to go over? We want to talk about my exchange on Twitter with a fan that finally listened to the episode and was like, "I heard Nelson's single."
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Never mind.
No, we said we were going to cover her. We are covering her.
She ended up being very nice. She's a fan out of Tennessee, and she's cool. But we had a good laugh about it.
Oh, you got a good talk. You had a good chat.
I feel bad because I want to tell the joke I told, but it's very insensitive for the topic that we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, probably best miss that one. However, I'm just going to let you know, no matter how nice you are, if we find out in the group chat that you're one of those people who believes in astrology, even if you're just joking about it, but you're joking about believing it, we are going to make fun of you in the group chat.
Yeah, I don't give a shit. Yeah, fuck you. Fuck you. I hate all of that shit. I can't do it's so Never mind. I'm not even gonna relitigate that shit, but it's so hard to find women that are like not into that shit. It's just so God. It's
Look, man,
so
beggars can't be
bad.
choosers. I
So
don't care.
bad.
I would tell you the time I was born and my birthday. If that gets you to talk to me, I don't give a fuck.
No, but you said you're a Scorpio, so she's like, oh shit, I gotta run.
Oh yeah. Oh god.
I don't even know what that means. What the fuck does that even mean?
I don't know. What does it mean? What does it mean?
My best friend is a Scorpio. I don't know what that means either.
What does it mean?
You're a Scorpio, so you're gonna murder. You're gonna murder me.
I will say that my husband is a Capricorn, apparently.
You know what that means?
Everything that people write about Capricorn, everything that people write about Capricorns is legitimately the opposite of him. Like if you wanted to point to somebody and say, oh, that person really embodies what their supposed sign is, you can point to me. I'm apparently very like what it's supposed to be. If you wanted to point to somebody who's like the opposite of what their sign is, you can point to my husband. We are the contradiction between us.
I am very Scorpio apparently. However, I did look. They had the list of like known prolific serial killers. None of them are Scorpios. So I think that Scorpios get a bad rap. At least we're not serial killers.
The problem is that I think all of them are.
They're mostly Capricorns.
Virgos. I think Virgos or whatever comes. Yeah, I think it's Virgo because that's kind of the sign that you are if your parents fucked around like Christmas, New Year's. Yeah.
I was a Valentine's Day gift. I was a Valentine's Day baby. That's when I counted it back 9 months, and I was a Valentine's Day.
What were you saying, Tommy?
I was saying gift is not the word I would use.
I was a curse.
Don't fuck around Valentine's Day, or you end up with Nelson.
You get a Nelson. That would be a great haul. We should come up with fucking gift cards, and that'll be one of the Valentine's Day ones. Happy Valentine's Day. Don't fuck today. You're gonna end up with a Nelson.
Wait a couple weeks at least, please.
Kai writes a Thanksgiving one. Just fuck you. Tommy, what would you have? What holiday would you pick, and what would you say?
He was gone. He was good. We were having a great time, Nelson. Tommy was gone.
We were having a great time.
I don't know these signs. I don't know.
We're talking about holidays.
If we did Dixieland the Proletariat holiday cards, which holiday would you pick, and what funny message would you have inside of it? Did we freeze?
There you go.
Are you back, Nelson?
No, I froze. What did you say?
We were just commenting that you froze.
Oh, yeah. What? Okay, so what holiday would you choose, and what funny thing would you say?
I'll pick Juneteenth and say fuck Nelson. That's what I would.
Oh my God. What were y'all saying? What were y'all saying when I was going to the bathroom? Y'all were like, Nelson could never give up on the show. He is the show.
Oh, no. Don't say y'all. I said that I can't pick on you anymore because if I pick on you, you're going to go crazy one day and end the podcast. And then Tommy launched into that.
Yeah, you're not in. He can't.
I can't. This is
like, I mean,
where else can a mediocre white man have an audience of hundreds of thousands of people?
Oh, you mean like 10 people?
Everywhere?
Okay.
Literally, that's the state of things?
Exactly. That's the joke. Oh, man. No, we're too far into it. We have y'all like, shit, I wish Tyler was here. But anyway, I'll pose this. I
wish the other white man was here.
You two were added later.
I'm being replaced. This is white genocide.
The other white was here so I could say the racist things that I want to say.
Oh my God. Anyway, this is white genocide because it's a majority minority podcast right now. Y'all like there are actually people who listen. Do you think like there are people who listen to this podcast, right? That have their favorite host and like legitimately are like, oh, Kai is like the coolest person ever. Oh, Tommy's
Nobody
great.
Says that, Nelson.
Nelson's a jackass. Like there's people. If you think about it, there probably are like out of the however many out of the 100,000 whatever downloads we have, like there's somebody out there that thinks that like we're cool, and that is weird because I'm not cool.
I know exactly how not cool all of us are.
There's probably
cool.
like so
You speak for yourselves.
Okay, Tommy. Okay,
like,
Tommy, I can't respond to the group chat because I am so far into the ass of this video game.
Yeah, thank you, Tommy. Tommy. I'm so cool. I'm like a personal G4 channel, and I'm fucking best in the world at Halo right now because all I do is work at my mixed level marketing company and play Halo all day.
Mixed level marketing? I think you mean multi-level
marketing,
and it's definitely not multi-level marketing.
If I found out that Tommy was working for an MLM, there would be fucking fireworks on this show. Okay.
Only someone who knows what MLM stands for works with MLM. There you go.
Or I'm just, cool.
There's a whole subset on YouTube talking about the ways that MLMs are predatory. And I'll mention to everybody listening that the couple times that I've mentioned something like that in the group chat, Nelson thought that I was saying
Marxist Leninist mouse.
You fucking white socialist. Oh my God.
We're actually about to be sponsored by that MLM.
Yeah. I can't wait to come up with like ad breaks.
Is that embezzling? Is that I need to get that cleared up.
No, it's not embezzling. No, embezzling would be you taking money from a company secretly without doing anything. You're promoting a company. You just happen to be head
Don't admit to this shit, Tommy.
Allegedly. You're just
in a video game.
You're just allegedly the head of marketing now for this MLM. And you're like, hey, on my podcast, I'm going to give people a promo code. And if they want to, have a group of their friends sell stuff for them and then kick the money up to me in the MLM.
What are you talking about? What?
Multi-level marketing. They could use the promo code.
Oh my God.
No, it's not embezzling. Embezzling would be like stealing money from something for stealing money for the company, using it for yourself. You're literally promoting a promo code to get people to use the service. It just happens to be on a podcast you co-host.
Sounds a lot like what I'm doing right now.
I don't think.
Oh God.
I don't think it's embezzling.
I'm just kidding. I don't care. I'll go. Throw me to jail. I don't give a shit. I'm going anyway. Statistically, I should have already been twice.
Tommy, you're beating the statistics. You're fine.
It's because you don't go outside. You can't get done for something nobody sees you do.
Let me tell you how reckless I used to be. Like I honestly cannot believe I have not gone to jail. Dude, I used to so at work.
This better be past statute of limitations by now. Oh my God.
Oh yeah, I don't give a shit. Fuck him. I used to.
Tommy also used to have flat ironed hair, so he didn't look aggressive or suspicious in any way.
I used to have like travel bongs and I have a strategically placed work bong because I worked out of town. And now I have to, I hit that shit in the car and on my way back and forth to Troy.
Oh my God.
Dude, I got pulled over. On my last day in Troy, I shit you not. My last day in Troy, I got pulled over, and I had 3 tubs of mushrooms in the back of.
I'm gonna make it a saute.
And the cop asked me what that was, and I was like, "Oh, that's just my kid's science project. You know how it goes." And then it was like, "Okay, yeah, I swear to God."
I swear to God. My God. You use the stereotype of racism of fucking state trooper.
Which stereotype is that, Nelson? Do you want to put words to it?
You know what? That doesn't really make any sense. You just tricked the state trooper because honestly, you know what? That really it doesn't make any sense. You just tricked the state trooper, which is great. That's hilarious.
Anyway.
Slick.
Yeah.
I would have been. I'm a saute and I'm making a sauce. This is
yeah.
This is fodder risotto.
And like when I would go to movie theater, so like I gotta get high before I go to a movie. So I would smoke a bowl in my car right before I go into the movie. Like I would always travel with copious amounts of drugs on me, and I never got caught. And I don't know why. And I should be in jail, but
pushing weight.
I would always have at least an ounce on me. That's like trafficking.
Cool. Great. Okay. There goes this episode because it's gonna get taken down for being like, this is now evidence in the case against Tommy.
There's no case against me. They wish. I'm too good for that. I'm the kind of guy that goes into court and represents himself.
I'm the
that
kind of
always
guy.
works. Works every single fucking time.
Likes to roam around with copious amounts of drugs in my car.
I used to. Michael would be like, dude, you're going to fucking jail. Like, I know, right?
Tommy's Gucci man. Tommy's Gucci man in the corner is like, sorry, did you do it? Bitch, I might be.
Bitch, I might be.
Bitch, I might be. Oh, man. Fuck
You guys
Canada.
ready for this episode?
Yeah, I'm already sad. Oh, before we start, I'm still single, so if anyone wants to hit me up, I'll drive. I don't care.
Oh God. Please stop. It's too sad.
Hold
It
on.
reeks of desperation and oh God. Oh, gross. You got everybody that's listening drier than Ben Shapiro's wife.
Oh man. Anyway, I did hurt
Everybody,
real
Go
quick.
ahead.
One last funny thing. I did tweak something in my shoulder blade, literally just sitting down in my car the other day. I was like, shit. I don't know what it was.
You are old as shit.
I know, right? God. Anyway, without further ado, Kai,
Yeah,
make
everybody
us
take
wanna-
a deep breath because it's gonna get bad.
make us die more than we already want to.
Trying to find my bowl so I can smoke a bowl.
Tommy, you can say to my face that you're not gonna listen. It's okay.
No, I am gonna listen. I got listen.
While he plays Halo, he's gonna.
You don't
listen.
understand. You don't see. Before I do anything in life, watch a movie, listen to a good story, play a video game,
Make fun of me.
definitely hang out with Nelson. I just have to get a little lit. You know what I mean?
Let's go get a little high. Let's go get a little high.
All right. So yeah, in case you didn't see the title of this episode, it's going to be about the residential school system in Canada. Just like to start this off a little bit. I know that I decided to bring up this episode months ago with these guys because again, it's not about Southern issues. If anything, if we want to tie it to the show in any way, it's going to be one of those oh, but Canada's great and the South is obviously very, very racist. And then no, I'm going to show you that Canada's just as fucking racist. But yeah, I decided to bring this episode up months ago. And I said that I was going to bring this up because it seemed like all of the news coverage was dying down. And then 2 weeks ago, Bailey Sarian, one of the most popular YouTubers and podcasters right now, English language podcasters. Yeah, she did an episode on residential schools. So now it looks like I'm fucking copying her. But anyway, so I'm going to start this off. What's that, Tommy?
I was gonna say before you start. Sorry, Bailey Sarian has got me really into makeup, and I really want to try it. I think I can do it. I watch so much.
We're going to hang out a lot when you get to Florida. Oh my
Yes.
God.
Oh my God. Yes.
Oh my God.
Oh my God, we're gonna be best friends. I'm just gonna be fucking the third wheeling.
Yeah, you're gonna be thrown in a swamp.
Nelson, you're going to be so pretty afterwards.
Oh yeah, we're
I'm gonna
gonna
hang
practice on Nelson.
I'm gonna hang out with Adam. I'm gonna hang out and talk cars with Adam.
You don't know.
While you're getting your makeup done by us.
Yeah, why not? And shooting guns with your dad. I'm gonna have my makeup done. Fucking just shooting guns, talking cars. Okay. Anyway, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Shut up.
So yeah, I'm going to start this off with the trigger warnings right now. If you managed to listen to the last 15, 20 minutes of this episode, good for you. If you have to click out because of these trigger warnings, I understand because this episode has affected me badly. I can only understand how this would affect somebody who has any of these triggers. However, if you do not have any of these triggers and you think you can listen to this episode, I implore you to stay on here. Don't just click off it because it might be sad. I'm talking about this for a reason because it's not talked about enough. So our trigger warnings are genocide, assault, sexual assault, deaths of children, religious-based assault, forced removal of children, the foster care system.
Copious amounts of the N-word.
Yes, native.
Just Canada in general.
Yeah, okay, so as usual, when I do these history episodes, I'm gonna introduce myself in my grandmother's language. Sego Sawagwego Yonkyats Kaiza Piroya, Gangyagahaga, Niwagahon Siota, Tanon Numana, Tanon Ndi. Hello, everyone. My name is Kiaza. I'm Mohawk, Comanche, and Apache. I introduce myself in my grandmother's language as a sign of respect and to let everyone know who my people are. I also want to make it clear that I'm not talking from personal experience in this episode, even though the events are very recent. Today, I'm going to be talking about the residential school system for Indigenous children. This will mostly cover events in Canada, although many of the same events happened in the US. It just happens that in this case, Canada is marginally ahead of the US concerning the truth of what both colonial countries did to Indigenous children. So there's more information coming out of Canada than there is in the US. To start, fuck off, Tommy. Right, okay, to start at the very bottom, I'm gonna start defining some terms so that nobody can come at me when I'm using these terms. I'll be referring to the system in Canada and the US as setting up and perpetuating cultural genocide. The legal definition of genocide is unspecific about the exact way in which genocide is committed, only stating that it is destruction with the intent to destroy a racial, religious, ethnic, or national group. As such, cultural genocide involves the eradication and destruction of cultural artifacts, such as books, artwork, structures, as well as suppression of cultural activities that do not conform to the destroyer's notion of what's appropriate. Even though the term's definition is nebulous, it was considered for inclusion in the 1948 Genocide Convention. It is used in the 1994 draft of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights of Indigenous People, otherwise known as UNDRIP. I point these out specifically because I've encountered numerous people who want to argue about the definition of genocide and what constitutes genocide. This is not a colloquial term, even though the specifics are not mentioned. There are characteristics of cultural genocide. It is an academic term. I want everyone to remember that the next time they engage with someone making the argument that X does not qualify as genocide. They're pulling the same stunt as people who do not use or recognize the academic definition of racism. Just while I am mentioning UNDRIP, I want to point out that the UN voted in huge favor for its passing, 144 to pass with 11 abstentions and 4 opposing. Does anybody want to guess what 4 countries those were that were opposing?
The US,
1,
Canada,
2,
Israel.
Nope.
Britain.
Nope.
Holy
you want the other 2?
Wait, time out. What?
Israel? Oh, Italy.
Nope.
Oh, thank God.
The other
China?
No.
Oh, they
the other 2 are New Zealand and Australia. So Canada, the United States, Australia, New Zealand. Who would have guessed that the 4 countries colonized by the same mother country and all places where genocide was attempted against Indigenous populations would have opposed the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People?
I would have thought New Zealand. I had such high hopes for this.
Yeah, especially New Zealand.
I could have sworn it would have been like Israel and fucking South Africa. Not South Africa. I thought it was going to be like US, Canada, UK, Israel.
No, actually, the UK, as blindered as it is on a lot of these issues, is more likely to sign on to them and just ignore it.
That makes sense.
More. Okay.
So also, this wasn't a very long time ago. It was only passed in 2007. That's the year I graduated high school. Imagine that. I had no international document of rights as an Indigenous person until I graduated high school.
Wow.
So to continue defining terms, another one that you'll hear me use a lot is TRC, or the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It was founded in 2008 and was established to travel across Canada, collecting the testimonies of people affected by the residential school system. About 7,000 Indigenous people told their stories. The TRC concluded in 2015 with the publication of a 6th volume, 4,000 plus page report detailing the testimonies of survivors and historical documents from the time. It resulted in the establishment of the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. I'll be referencing the documents of the TRC often, as it's the best source for firsthand accounts. And even though I've expressed the importance of oral history before in my episodes, I can only work with what I have online. My own family's history of residential boarding schools died with my great uncles, and they refused to ever talk about it.
Hey, Kai, I'm sorry. I hate to correct you on this, but it's actually CRT. CRT. We can't be teaching that in schools. None of it. None of it.
Tommy. Go back to your bowl or whatever you're gonna do now.
I just wanted to be clear. This is not me interrupting. It's Tommy.
Just set the record straight, okay? It's ruining
the
our
record
school
is as
system.
straight as it's ever gonna fucking get now.
Okay.
All right. Back to the point. Residential schools. What do you want?
No, I'm sorry. I'm going to be quiet. I'll say it at the end.
All right. Residential schools, as they're called in Canada, and Indian boarding schools, as they're called in the US, were a devastating tool for the colonizing governments, usually through religion, to force assimilation on the youngest and most vulnerable in Indigenous communities. That is because the point of a residential school is to, quote, kill the Indian to save the man, end quote, which was coined by the man who founded the first federal Indian boarding school in the US in 1879, Army Lieutenant Richard Pratt. As explained in the executive summary of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's final report, quote, underlying these arguments was the belief that the colonizers were bringing civilization to savage people who could never civilize themselves, a belief of racial and cultural superiority, end quote. These assimilation efforts began in the 1600s with French missionaries such as the Jesuits. Incidentally, that explains why my own language does not appear as it sounds to English speakers, because it was written in the Latin alphabet for the first time by French-speaking Jesuits. So English-speaking Mohawk people seeking to reclaim their language through the written word have to translate it first from French and then into Mohawk. So the Canadian government didn't exist back in the 1600s, and the Crown they answered to did not attempt state-sanctioned schools again until the 1800s, but religious orders did open more schools, first from Anglicans and Catholics and then Protestants. These schools not only sought to convert Indigenous children, but also force them away from the traditional food ways and undertake European-style farming. It's weird, the tendrils of assimilation can be found in the least expected places, that it's through food and clothing and things like that. The Mohawk Institute Residential School, the oldest continually operated residential school in Canada, opened in 1834 in Six Nations of the Grand River near Brantford, Ontario. Administered by the Anglican Church, the facility opened as the Mechanics Institute, a day school for boys, in 1828, and became a boarding school 4 years later when it accepted its first boarders and began admitting female students. And it remained open and in operation until June 30th of 1970. Over the course of the residential system's more than 100-year existence, around 150,000 children were placed in residential schools nationally. As the system was designed as an immersion program, Indigenous children were in many schools prohibited and oftentimes punished for speaking their own languages or practicing their own faiths. The primary stated goal was to convert Indigenous children to Christianity and, quote, acculturate them. Many of the government-funded residential schools were run by churches of various denominations. Between 1867 and 1939, the number of schools operating in Canada at one time peaked at 80 in 1931. Of those schools, 44 were operated by 16 Catholic dioceses and about 36 Catholic communities. 21 were operated by the Church of England / Anglican Church of Canada, and 13 were operated by the United Church of Canada, and 2 were operated by Presbyterians. Although education in Canada was made the jurisdiction of the provincial governments by the British North America Act, Indigenous peoples and their treaties were under the jurisdiction of the federal government. As a condition of several treaties, the federal government agreed to provide Indigenous education. Residential schools were funded under the Indian Act by what was then the Federal Department of the Interior. Adopted in 1876 as an act to amend and consolidate the laws respecting Indians, it consolidated all previous laws placing Indigenous communities, land, and finances under federal control. As explained by the TRC, the act, quote, made Indians wards of the state, unable to vote in provincial or federal elections or enter the professions if they did not surrender their status, and severely limited their freedom to participate in spiritual and cultural practices, end quote. So I don't know if you call it that through the flowery language. That means that you could literally lose, no, not you could, you would lose your federal status as an Indigenous person in Canada if you undertook professions. So, cool. The parents and families of Indigenous children resisted the residential school system throughout its existence. Children were kept from schools and in some cases hidden from government officials tasked with rounding up children on reserves. Parents regularly advocated for increased funding for schools, including the increase of centrally located day schools to improve access to their children, and made repeated requests for improvements to the quality of education, food, and clothing being provided. Demands for answers in regards to claims of abuse were often dismissed as a ploy by parents seeking to keep their children at home, with government and school officials positioned as those who knew best. In 1894, amendments to the Indian Act made school attendance compulsory for Indigenous children between the ages of 7 and 16. The changes included a series of exemptions regarding school location, the health of the children, and their prior completion of school examinations. It was changed to children between the ages of 6 and 15 years old in 1908. The introduction of mandatory attendance was the result of pressure from missionary representatives. They were reliant on student enrollment quotas to secure their funding, so they were struggling to attract new students due to the increasingly poor school conditions. Compulsory attendance ended in 1948, following the 1947 report of a special joint committee and subsequent amendment of the Indian Act. Government officials were still able to influence student attendance, though. The introduction of the Family Allowance Act in 1945 stipulated that school-age children had to be enrolled in school for families to qualify for the so-called baby bonus, further coercing Indigenous parents into having their children attend. And while I've been noting that this is the history of Canadian residential schools, a very similar system was followed in the US. In fact, John A. Macdonald, the first Prime Minister of Canada, commissioned a report on the American Indigenous Indian boarding school system to be used in the new government of Canada. Boarding schools in the US were founded in 29 states, with the most famous being the Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania. In fact, quite recently, I heard someone proudly say that Carlisle, Pennsylvania was their hometown and also Jim Thorpe's hometown, when in actuality, he was sent to the Carlisle Indian School. He himself was Sac and Fox and Potawatomi and was born in Oklahoma. There are still 73 running Indian schools in the US, with 15 still boarding students. And before you ask, there was one in Alabama called the Asbury Manual Labor School in Mission, which ran from 1822 to 1830 in connection with Fort Mitchell. And while that may seem like a blessedly short amount of time, it closed in 1830 to coincide with the forced removal of the Muskogee in accordance with the Indian Removal Act, or the reason for the Trail of Tears. The conditions in residential schools were about as bad as you can imagine. Close quarters and poor sanitation allowed illness to run rampant. The administrators of the schools, mostly clergy and nuns, physically, mentally, and sexually abused the kids. The buildings were not adequately heated, and their clothing was stripped from them upon entering, and they were given uniforms that often did not fit and would not keep them warm enough. Funding was tied to enrollment numbers, which incentivized the administrators to accept sick children. The funding, or lack of it, also led to kids being used as slave labor for farming and maintenance. Nutrition experiments, which involved intentional malnourishment of children, vaccine trials for the BCG vaccine, as well as studies on extrasensory perception, vitamin D diet supplements, amoebicides, hemoglobin, bedwetting, and dermatoglyphics or fingerprints were all run without consent on children in Canada's residential schools. Parents and family members regularly traveled to the schools, often camping outside to be closer to their children. So many parents made the trip that Indian Commissioner Hayter Reed argued that schools should be moved farther away from reserves to make visiting more difficult. And when the schools were already purposely built far away from reserves for that very reason. There were also many instances of children being sent to schools that were much further away than their nearest ones in order to deter escape. Indian Commissioner Reed also objected to allowing students to return home during school breaks and holidays because he believed the trips interrupted their assimilation. Visitation for those who could make the journey was strictly controlled by school officials in a manner similar to the procedures enforced in the prison system. In some cases, schools denied parents access to their children altogether. Others required families to meet with them in the presence of school officials and speak only in English. Parents who could not speak in English were unable to talk to their children. The obstacles families faced to visit their children were further exacerbated by the pass system. Introduced by the previously mentioned Reed, the pass system restricted and closely monitored the movement of Indigenous peoples off reserves. launched in 1885 as a response to the Northwest Rebellion and later replaced by permits, the system was designed to prevent Indigenous people from leaving reserves without a pass issued by local Indian agents. At least 33 children that we know of attempted escape from these hellholes and died in the process. In 1935, a 15-year-old boy froze to death in negative 32 degrees Celsius while escaping Round Lake School in Saskatchewan and was found by a search party, including his own father. In 1937, 4 boys were denied permission to visit their families and froze to death while trying to cross a lake in negative 29 degrees Celsius weather. In 1939, a father heard from a passerby that they believed his son had attempted to escape his school near Gordon's Reserve in Saskatoon. The father found his own son's frozen body, and when the school was informed, they hadn't even known that the boy was gone for 3 days. In 1959, 2 sisters in British Columbia attempted an escape in a small boat. One body washed ashore, and the other body was never found. In 1966, an Anishinaabe boy, Cheney Wenjack, ran away from Cecilia Jeffrey Indian Residential School. He died of hunger and exposure at Farlane, Ontario, while trying to walk 600 kilometers or 370 miles back to his home, Ogoki Post on the Martin Falls Reserve. This case brought to light the treatment and the emotional harm done to Indigenous children at schools. It was eventually turned into a concept album, a graphic novel, and an animated short film. And while 1966 seems quite recent, it was not the last death. In 1970, 2 12-year-old boys froze to death trying to escape another school in the same town as Cheney Wenjack.
Wait. Go back to 1960. You froze.
Yeah, you froze. That's the only reason we're stopping is because you froze.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll start that one again.
1966 is the last thing you said.
Okay. In 1966, an Anishinaabe boy, Cheney Wenjack, ran away from Cecilia Jeffrey Indian Residential School. He died of hunger and exposure at Farlane, Ontario, while trying to walk 600 kilometers or 370 miles back to his home on Ogoki Post on the Martin Falls Reserve. This case brought to light the treatment and the emotional harm done to Indigenous children at schools. It was eventually turned into a concept album, a graphic novel, and an animated short film. And while 1966 seems quite recent, it was not the last death. In 1970, 2 12-year-old boys froze to death trying to escape another school in the same town as Cheney Wenjack. While this might already be horrifying for some, this is a rather sanitary description of the history of residential schools in Canada. At the end of this episode, I'm going to read some firsthand accounts that were aggregated by Anthony Meltingtallow. I will share the trigger warnings again before I go into that, and I very much urge people to follow them. It's quite heavy listening. So some of you may be aware that this summer, a flurry of reports came out about unmarked graves being found on the grounds of former residential schools. Now that you have some idea of what those schools were like, I'm sure it's not surprising that the mortality rate in the schools was skyrocketing from the late 1800s all the way up to the 1960s when residential schools started closing down. Research by the TRC revealed that at least 3,201 students had died and claimed that that was mostly from disease. However, TRC Chair Justice Murray Sinclair has suggested the number of deaths may actually exceed 6,000. And Kevin Annett, author of Hidden No Longer, Genocide in Canada, Past and Present, said he was looking into deaths of Indigenous children long before it was on the national radar. He noted upward of 50,000 children who died while at residential schools. Quote, the ones you won't hear from are the more than 50,000 children who died from beatings, starvation, rape, and torture, or being deliberately exposed to tuberculosis and left to cough their lives away in squalor and terror, all at the hands of Christian men and women who have never been prosecuted for their crimes, end quote. Annett wrote in a preamble to his book, quote, these murdered children lie in nearly forgotten graves across Canada, and their ashes are scattered on the sea and land after they were incinerated in residential school furnaces to hide the crime that killed them, end quote. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission wrote that the policy of Indian Affairs was to refuse to return the bodies of children home due to the associated expense and to instead require the schools to bear the cost of burials. The TRC concluded that it may be impossible to ever identify the number of deaths or missing children, in part because of the practice of burying students in unmarked graves. The work is further complicated by a pattern of poor record keeping by school and government officials who neglected, or purposely as far as I'm concerned, to keep reliable numbers about the number of children who died and where they were buried. While most schools had cemeteries on site, their location and extent remained difficult to determine, as cemeteries that were originally marked were found to have been later razed, intentionally hidden, or built over. In 2009, the TRC requested $1.5 million in extra funding from the federal government to complete this work, but was denied. In May 2021, remains believed to be those of 215 children were found buried on the site of the Kamloops Indian Residential School in Kamloops, British Columbia, on the lands of the Tekamloops Secwepemc First Nation. The remains were located with the assistance of ground-penetrating radar specialists. Chief Roseanne Casimir wrote that the deaths were believed to have been undocumented and that work was underway to determine if records related were held at the Royal British Columbia Museum. On June 23, 2021, an estimated 751 unmarked graves were found on the site of Marieville Indian Residential School in Marieville, Saskatchewan, on the land of the Cowessess First Nation. And on June 30th, 2021, the Lower Kootenay Band reported the discovery of 182 unmarked graves near St. Eugene's Mission School near Cranbrook, British Columbia. As of August 2021, more than 1,300 unmarked graves have been found across 5 former residential schools. While these numbers are shocking, the finding of unmarked graves around residential schools is not. Between 1992 and 1994, the unmarked grave sites of 161 children were found through the efforts of a Métis resident near the former Sacred Heart Mission School near Yellowknife, Northwest Territory. Kevin Annett, a defrocked United Church of Canada minister, publicized evidence of the deaths of Indigenous children in a 1995 book and took his claims to the Canadian police in 1996. Investigations at 19 other sites, mostly led by First Nations committees and elders, have been underway or started following the discovery in Kamloops in May 2021, including the Mohawk Institute and 6 Nations that I mentioned earlier. Following the discoveries of so many bodies, calls were heard for apologies from the heads of the churches that participated in the runnings of these schools. In the 1990s, apologies were tendered by several of the missionary sects that participated and from a congregation of Canadian bishops. In 2009, a delegation of 40 First Nations representatives from Canada and several Canadian bishops had a private meeting with Pope Benedict XVI to obtain an apology for abuses that occurred in the residential school system. Afterwards, the Holy See released an official expression of sorrow on the church's role in residential schools and the, quote, deplorable conduct of some members of the church. This is the actual quote here. His Holiness the Pope emphasized that acts of abuse cannot be tolerated in society. He prayed that all those affected would experience healing, and he encouraged First Nations people to continue to move forward with renewed hope, end quote. Which I'm sure you can hear is not an apology, nor is it taking responsibility for anything. On May 29th, 2017, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau asked the current Pope Francis for a public apology to all survivors of the residential school system. While one has not been given, there will be another delegation of Indigenous people going to the Vatican in December 2021 to discuss an apology with the current Pope. We'll see if that ever fucking happens. In January 1998, the government made a statement of reconciliation, including an apology to those who were sexually or physically abused while attending residential schools, and established the Aboriginal Healing Foundation, or the AHF. The foundation was provided with $350 million to fund community-based healing projects addressing the legacy of physical and sexual abuse. Federal funding for the foundation was cut in 2010 by the Stephen Harper government, leaving 134 national healing-related initiatives without an operating budget. The AHF closed in 2014. Former AHF Executive Director Mike DeGain has said that the loss of AHF support has created a gap in dealing with mental health crises such as the suicides in the Attawapiskat First Nation. Just to touch on that briefly, Attawapiskat has been facing several crises, including a severe spike in suicide attempts, especially in adolescents. In 7 months in 2017, More than 100 attempts were counted, including one night of 12 attempts. In July 2019, the Attawapiskat Band Council notified residents that the tap water had tested positively for potential harmful levels of trihalomethanes, or THMs, and haloacetic acids, or HAAs, byproducts of the disinfection process created when chlorine interacts with high levels of organic materials. They were told not to bathe in it, not to cook with it, and not to inhale vapors from it. And a state of emergency was declared. Adrian Sutherland, who was a resident, said, "This is our tap water that flows into our houses. It's important to note we do not drink from our taps. We never have. Even when plumbing arrived in our homes in the late 1990s, it has been brought to the community. It had been brought to the community 20 years earlier, but only for teachers and hospital staff. Even then, we weren't able to drink the tap water." Across the country, suicide and self-inflicted injury is the leading cause of death for First Nations people below the age of 44. Studies show young Indigenous males are 10 times more likely to kill themselves than their non-Indigenous male counterparts, while young Indigenous females are 21 times more likely than young non-Indigenous females. Issues like the drinking water contamination and poverty play parts in boosting these troubling suicide statistics. Recent research has found more than 100 reserves still lack housing, electricity, or running water, with almost 90 of them being advised to boil their drinking water. Another study by the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives found that 60% of children on the reserves are living in poverty. Stacey Wormall Street, Director of Operations at Ask Wellness Society, a nonprofit helping Indigenous communities struggling with addiction, agrees the impact of residential schools, the last of which closed its doors in 1996, still permeates Indigenous communities today. The deep-rooted trauma which Canada's Aboriginal people suffered through the assimilation of their culture by the Canadian government has been carried on through generations, she says. Today, we continue to see a drastic and tragic rise in death by suicide within our Aboriginal youth. Ontario is in the process of releasing death records of approximately 1,800 Indigenous children to the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation. Releasing death records was one of the recommendations in the 2015 report from the TRC that documented abuse suffered by Indigenous children at residential schools, the thing I mentioned earlier. This comes on the heels of the unveiling in 2019 of the names of 2,800 children who died in residential schools, with a further 1,600 who died but could not be named. So these are just the ones that we can pinpoint exactly who their names are. The work of the TRC, and at the constant urging of leadership of First Nations people, has started moving Canada forward to gain an understanding of just what was done to these children. There's even a named day for it, the Day for Truth and Reconciliation, or colloquially known as Orange Shirt Day, on September 30th. It is so called based on the accounts of Phyllis Jack Webstad, whose personal clothing, including a new orange shirt, was taken from her during her first day of residential schooling and never returned. The orange shirt is thus used as a symbol of forced assimilation of Indigenous children that the residential school system enforced. Orange Shirt Day has been observed since 2013, but was elevated to a statutory holiday in 2021. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, though, had been invited to spend the day with the Tecumseh Secwepemc Nation near the place the first Indian residential school unmarked graves were discovered earlier in the year. Trudeau ignored the invitation, and his schedule showed him as having meetings in Ottawa that day. However, Trudeau instead took an unannounced private holiday in Tofino, British Columbia. The TRC made 94 calls to action to help address Canada's residential school pass, but most of these were ignored until they couldn't be anymore. Now, to paint a bigger picture of how this colonization has continued to inflict similar damage to the residential school system, I'll pivot slightly to the topic of the 60s scoop and treatment of Indigenous children in Canada up to today. Residential schools started to close down in the 1960s, though the last one would not close its doors until 1996. In that period, however, a new system took its place that would eventually be called the 60s scoop, though it ran from the late 50s all the way to the mid 80s. This was a period in which a series of policies were enacted in Canada that enabled child welfare authorities to take, or quote, scoop up Indigenous children from their families and communities for placement in foster homes, from which they would be adopted by white families. This happened to an estimated 20,000 Indigenous children, and similar numbers can be found on the American side. The 60s scoop was primarily born out of Canada's belief that Indigenous parents could not take care of their children following the closing of boarding schools, and social workers fanned out across the country to assess those families. Many of these social workers were completely unfamiliar with the culture or history of the Aboriginal communities they entered. What they believed constituted proper care was generally based on middle-class Euro-Canadian values. For example, when a social worker entered the homes of families subsisting on a traditional Aboriginal diet of dried game, fish, and berries, and didn't see fridges or cupboards stocked in typical Euro-Canadian fashion, they assumed that the adults in the home were not providing for their children. Additionally, upon seeing the social problems reserved communities faced, such as poverty, unemployment, and addiction, some social workers felt a duty to, quote, protect the local children. In many cases, Aboriginal parents who were living in poverty but otherwise providing caring homes had their children taken away from them with little or no warning and absolutely no consent. In fact, it was not until 1980 that the Child, Family, and Community Services Act required social workers to notify the Band Council if an Aboriginal child was removed from the community. An alarmingly disproportionate number of Aboriginal children were apprehended from the 60s onward. By the 1970s, roughly 1/3 of children in care were Aboriginal. Approximately 70% of the children apprehended were placed into non-Aboriginal homes, many of them homes in which their heritage was denied. In some cases, the foster or adoptive parents told their children that they were French or Italian instead. Ontario Superior Court Justice Edward Belobaba ruled that the government was liable for the harm caused by the 60s scoop. And on the 6th of October 2017, an $800 million settlement was announced for the Martel case, which was one of the landmark cases. As Métis and non-status First Nations people are currently excluded from that agreement, though, the National Indigenous Survivors of Child Welfare Network, a group that's led by 60s scoop survivors based in Ottawa, has advocated for the settlement to be rejected unless it includes all Indigenous people who were taken from their homes and forcibly adopted. Even today, discriminatory policies are only just being forced out, such as the birth alert system. A birth alert or hospital alert is a practice in which a social or healthcare worker notifies the staff of a hospital if they have concerns for the safety of an expected child based on their parents' history. This can include past instances of poverty, domestic violence, drug use, and history with child welfare. Birth alerts are typically issued without the parents' consent and often result in apprehension and placement of the child into the foster care system after birth. Birth alerts have been disproportionately used for Indigenous children. In June 2019, the final report of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, or MMIWG, recommended the abolishment of the practice targeting and apprehending infants from Indigenous mothers right after they give birth, as they were, quote, racist and discriminatory and are a gross violation of the rights of the child, the mother, and the community, end quote. While it may seem in the child's best interest on the face, many times the birth alert system had completely false information regarding the parents, primarily mothers, and in other cases were called in only because of assumptions based on the race of the parents. Between January 1st, 2018 and September 16th, 2019, British Columbia alone issued 423 birth alerts. Of those, 228, or more than half, the mothers were Indigenous. In one disturbing video, which showed the result of a birth alert, live streamed on social media in 2019, which I remember watching, police arrived at a Winnipeg hospital only days after an infant's birth to take the child away. The mother, an Indigenous woman, can be seen rocking back and forth and crying while holding her baby. In the video, when the family asked for 5 to 10 minutes of privacy to say goodbye, the police refused. According to APTN News, the infant in the viral video was reunited with her family a few months later when a Winnipeg judge awarded guardianship to the mother's aunt. Following the release of the MMIWG report, the practice of birth alerts was discontinued in multiple provinces in the years that followed, including Alberta, British Columbia, Manitoba, Newfoundland and Labrador, Ontario, Prince Edward Island, Saskatchewan, and the Yukon. As of February 21, though, birth alerts are still practiced in all of the remaining provinces, including Quebec and the Atlantic provinces of New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. Many campaigners are now highlighting the links between that system and the estimated 40,000 Indigenous children and youth in foster care, according to figures from the Assembly of First Nations. Census data shows that more than half of the children in Canadian foster homes are Indigenous, despite them making up less than 8% of the country's child population. The child welfare system is run primarily by individual provinces, and the figures vary. In Manitoba, approximately 90% of children in care are Indigenous. Quote, the reasons why Indigenous kids go into care are driven by poverty, poor housing, substance misuse, and mental health and domestic violence due to the multi-generational trauma of residential schools, end quote, says Blackstock, the executive director of the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society. Although it was curtailed with new regulations and a greater emphasis on Indigenous-led child welfare agencies, the disproportionate flow of Indigenous children into the foster care system has continued. Canada's Minister of Indigenous Services, Mark Miller, says there are now more Indigenous children in care across the country than were ever in residential schools at any one given time. Racism in the modern child welfare system has been well documented and systematic, he says. Through all of these approaches that change with what is acceptable to colonizers as time moves on, the attack on Indigenous children is clear. When the colonial power cannot change or simply kill the adults, they attack the children and hope to assimilate them that way. And as heavy as all of this is, I want to finish with firsthand accounts from survivors of the residential school system. This will be difficult to read to me and to listen to. In the words of some of the survivors who shared their stories, they want us to know and they don't want us to forget. I also want to remind the listeners that while these accounts are so horrific, they may seem unbelievable. That is not our job to, or even our right to disbelieve survivors. The purpose of genocide and the main tool of abusers is to dehumanize and discredit victims. Once someone is dehumanized, it's much easier for abusers to justify their abuse. And I'll reiterate the trigger warnings from earlier. Please pay attention to them. Trigger warnings for death, murder, suicide, assault, child sexual assault, religious assault, children forced away from families, and starvation as punishment. Quote, and we were on the train, for about 4 days, I think, something like that. And the more people they picked up, the more squished we all became inside the train. And we were packed in like a bunch of sardines. There was kids laying on the floor all along in where the walkway was supposed to be. And I could hear really lots of crying all the time, crying. I could hear a baby crying about the second day. So I start looking and I found this little one in the corner. There was a whole bunch of kids around. I don't know if they were alive or whatever, you know. I picked him up anyway, and I remember packing him around. I lost the space that I was sitting at, so I was walking around. I was lucky I had a coat. I took my coat off. I remember holding him, sitting, holding him, looking at his face, nothing to eat, nothing to drink. I couldn't give him anything, end quote. By Sphenia Jones on her trip to an Alberta residential school from Haida Gwaii off the coast of British Columbia. Quote, Dear Sir, July 24th, 1935, Drift Pile, Alberta. Last winter, J.B. Gambler, an Indian of Calling Lake, has taken his children away from the Wabaska Residential Children's School without the assent of the principal, and when the magistrate acting as truant officer went to him to regain possession of the children, he used abusive language, threatening to shoot him. As the above mentioned, J.B. Gambler is in receipt of a monthly ration. I have to order that same to be cut off entirely until such time as I am able to reverse my decision. This cannot be expected until the children are back in school at Wabaska and Gambler's amends presented to the principal and magistrate there. Your account dated 7th of July is being passed and submitted. Yours faithfully, N.P. El Heru, Indian Agent. Quote, in keeping with the promise to civilize the little pagan, they went to work and cut off my braids, which incidentally, according to the Assiniboine traditional custom, was a token of mourning. The closer the relative, the closer the cut. After my haircut, I wondered in silence if my mother had died, as they had cut my hair close to the scalp. Daniel Kennedy, LeBret Residential School Survivor Testimony. Quote, away back in years, about 50 years ago, I was about 5 years old at the time. There was flu going around. A lot of children died. 3 of my sisters died within 2 days. Nancy and Gladys died at home on the Muscadet Reserve. Beatrice died at the Onion Lake Residential School. The news of her death did not reach my parents for about 2 weeks. Beatrice was buried at Onion Lake. My dad wanted to build coffins for the burial of my 2 sisters, but he needed some lumber. To get the lumber, he wanted to sell one of his steers. To sell the steer, he had to get a permit from Mr. Simpson, the farm instructor, but the farm instructor refused to give him a permit. My dad went ahead and sold one of the steers anyway to a farmer in the Birch Hills district. He then bought the lumber and white material he needed to make the coffins. He made the coffins and buried my sisters. About a month later, the RCMP came to our home. Mr. Simpson was with them. He showed the police where we lived. They took my dad away because he sold a steer without a permit. My dad spent 3 months in jail. By Alvina Drever. Quote, today I understand quite a few words in my language, but every time I try and talk it, my tongue hurts. I don't know why. I ran into another woman who went to residential school with me, and we were talking about it. She asked me if I remembered how they would stick a needle in our tongue if we got caught talking our language. Maybe what she said was true. Maybe that's why my tongue hurts every time I try to talk my language. Residential school survivor testimony. Glenn told me a story about a boy who was mistreated so badly by the priests and nuns of the Muskowaquan school that he hung himself in the shower room. From the shower room, you can see directly out of this window. I pictured that boy looking out this window as he slipped away from this earth. I hope his soul finds its way to the window and flew away to be with his creator. Sadly, this boy was one of many Aboriginal children who lost their lives in the Indian residential school system. Quote, the priest tried to make me give, this is a really bad one. The priest tried to make me give him a blowjob, but I puked in his pants. Then they tried with Pete and he bit him. So they pulled out his teeth so he would not bite again. He was lucky because those were his baby teeth. They tied him to a tree post outside and I can still hear him gurgling blood. I didn't want them to pull out my teeth and I didn't want to get killed. What do? You can't fight. You just bide your time and hopefully you'll have the chance to fight one day. With both boys somewhat subdued, the speaker, Heward, said they killed T-Bert. I think they beat T-Bert to death to keep us in check, he said. When Nick and Pete were forced to dig a hole, which the priest lied and said was to plant trees, they knew the truth. One of the most well-known accounts is by Irene Fable. She attended the Roman Catholic Muskowaquan Indian Residential School, which was about 150 kilometers from Regina, Saskatchewan. Quote, I'm 75. I went to residential school in Muskowaquan from 1944 to 1949, and I had a rough life. I was mistreated in every way. There was a young girl, she was 7 years old, and she was pregnant. And what they did, she had her baby, and they took the baby and wrapped it in a nice pink outfit, and they took it downstairs where I was cooking dinner with the nun. And they took the baby into the furnace room, and they threw that little baby in there and burned it alive. All you could hear was this little cry like, ugh, and that was it. You could smell that flesh cooking. It was a big mistake when people say we were treated good. There's no way. There's a lot of things that happen in those boarding schools, end quote. And to end the episode, I just want you to know that in 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission located over 5,000 living and accused abusers.
Is anything gonna happen?
Who knows? I don't think anything's been brought against them so far.
Yeah, that's fucked, man.
Yep. Anything you guys want to close off with?
No.
All right, fuck. Fuck. I mean, I do want to say thank you, Kai, for doing this episode, because that definitely needed to be told, and I learned a lot of extremely disturbing things. Like, just so you don't hear about this, and no one really knows about it for a specific reason because it was kept under wraps for so long. So, I mean, for you to be able to get through that is extremely powerful, and you're very brave, and thank you. I mean, people needed to know this story.
Canada has done a really good job at rehabilitating its, I don't know, it's the way it looks in front of the rest of the world. But if you're Indigenous, you know that they are just as horrific as any other colonizing power, including the United States. And if people see me on social media going hard against Canada, they think it's a joke. I mean it. These are the stories that you hear if you actually listen. And the fact that the TRC was only completed in 2015, you know, almost 7 years ago at this point, you know, that's how long they've been able to look in the eye of what they've done to people.
Have the conditions of the ones that are currently running like any better?
So they don't have any running in Canada. In the United States, they still have, I think it's somewhere around 70 that are running and only 15 that are taking boarding students. The state of boarding schools in the US is less written about. I mean, that's what I mean when I say that Canada, I'm writing this about Canada because Canada has more information available. Whereas the US system, the US doesn't even really admit that there was a boarding school. And if they do admit it, they don't say that there was anything wrong with it. And there hasn't been a concerted effort to talk to victims afterwards. However, I would assume that with boarding schools today, you would run into the same issues as with any boarding school, because you're essentially stripping a child of the people who are supposed to care about them first and putting them in the hands of somebody who is accountable to no one. So maybe some of them are fine. Probably a lot of them have predators working in them still. But the reason that a lot of these places were built is because of colonization, because of the federal governments of these countries, because the federal governments established treaties, which means that any care that's being given, which is kind of a bad word to use, but anyway, any care that's being given to the tribes comes under federal law. So it's the federal government that is responsible, unless the ones that are still running are private institutions, in which case who knows what happens at private institutions. But if there's any federal run ones, they are built usually far away from the reserves or the reservations that they're supposed to be serving. And they're supposedly giving them an education in the way that your education could be gained in the first place, which is, you see a lot of Indigenous people today kind of eschewing that altogether. They would rather have on the land kind of education from their own people, to know how their own land works, to know how their own tribal governments work, and kind of trying to stay away from that altogether. However, the federal government usually has laws on the book saying that children have to be going to school or else it's considered abuse of some kind. But there's no way that you can make those two things exist without abuse happening.
Right. Yeah.
There's no answer.
Yeah, and you make it a target for, for predators. And that's, that I'm sure that directly correlates to the MMIW cases that are just happening all over the place.
Yeah.
It's just wild. I think the most shocking thing that got me is, honestly, I didn't realize that these practices, like a lot of these practices, are still going on. Like it's wild. I had no idea.
Yeah, there was a lot of call kind of as the residential school system was aging and into the 20th century, there's a lot of call to increase the number of day schools, which day school basically translates to what you and I would consider a school that you go to during the day and then you go home at night, which limits the amount of abuse that can happen, because the children have communication with their support networks then. And any kind of abuse, which can still happen, is more likely to be reported in those situations. But again, like I said, they purposely built these schools so far away to try to deter escape, they would often say that parents kidnapped their own children. So if the kids were allowed home, then the parents might hide them. And if the parents were allowed to visit, they would make ways for the children to escape with them. And at that point, you should be wondering, what are they supposed to be escaping from? You know, if they're being kidnapped, that sounds like it should be against their will, but what they're escaping from is something that's far worse. And returning to the love and support of their own families, hopefully the love and support of their own families. But again, you can see the impact of assimilation, of colonization, of residential schools is causing families to break down on reserves. And that's where you end up with the suicide epidemic, with the drug use epidemics, the horrible poverty that are on reserves. And as I mentioned kind of in the middle there, that for the longest time, I think up until the 40s, you would lose status as First Nations if you took on professions.
Yeah.
So you're purposely so if anybody wanted to keep their status, you're purposely taking away any way for them to continue to make enough money to not have poverty in their own homes, because you have also taken away, you know, nobody would say that people who were living in North America before colonization were living in poverty. They were living subsistence lifestyles, but they were living subsistence lifestyles. However, when you create the system that it's money or death, and then say it's money through a job or you lose your status, you're purposely creating ways that either they live in poverty or they lose everything they've ever known.
I did have a question about.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
No, I did have a question about that. If you lose your status, does that mean you have to leave the reservation?
In some cases that does. It depends on kind of what your home nation is like. Some nations are far more stringent on who can live on reserve and who can't. Some aren't as stringent. And in a lot of cases, if you are to pursue a job, you have to move out of your First Nation, because if you're living in the Northwest Territory, which is very, very far north, kind of in the northern plains of Canada, there's nowhere to get a job unless you leave. So my particular reservation, which is Ganawagi, near Montreal in Canada, they're very stringent about who lives on reserve and who doesn't. And for the longest time, if you're non-status, you couldn't live there at all. If you were non-status and married to a status person, you were kind of like on thin ice. And to back that up, until I think it was the early 90s or the late 80s, if you were a woman so if you were a Mohawk woman living in Ganawagi and you married a non-status person, they could be another native, but if they weren't a status Mohawk themselves, you were disinherited from your tribe. So they had a massive outflow of women leaving the community, just simply because there's more people to meet, more people to love, more people to marry, other people of status who aren't of your own tribe. So there's this massive outflow, and that comes from the Indian Act. The Indian Act, which I quoted in there, the Indian Act enforced things like that. So it's always what I meant when assimilation and colonization has the weirdest little tendrils that you don't think to find that. And then you find, you brush away a little bit and you find this other weird thing, this other weird little tiny law that like, oh, we've given you a way to stay status, to stay on your land, to stay with the people that you know. But if you do literally anything else, then you give up everything you've ever known, you know?
I saw a video. I don't know who was representing the First Nations people, but it was like a panel, like a committee, like a government committee. And the First Nations people were like just drilling Trudeau's father when he was prime minister. It was like, we didn't want the act. Like we didn't want this. You gave us this. We didn't want this act.
Yeah.
So it was just like,
he
wild.
was he was the architect of the white paper, I think, which was basically the Indian Act Part 2. So as the Indian Act was kind of like, people are going, oh, this is pretty horrifying. We need new legislation. That was basically the white paper. And that's what Trudeau's dad did when he was prime minister, basically. Other prime ministers come to mind. So there's Jean Chrétien, who was the prime minister kind of during the 60s scoop. And he said that he was not aware of there being any problems and that he loved Indigenous people because he adopted an Indigenous child. He participated in the 60s scoop and didn't know that there was any trouble. And then another prime minister that was on the list that we were talking about, Stephen Harper. Stephen Harper was a fucking devil. He was the one who was prime minister during the I Don't Know More uprisings in the early 2010s. And he was basically like the, what do they call it? When they basically take money away from everything. That's what his funding, was like. Yeah. He took away funding for everything. And it was a conservative government, so fuck him anyway. So.
Yeah, didn't he have a painting commissioned of himself naked, like laying on a couch or something?
Gosh, I don't know. There's so much shitty about him to begin with. So yeah, I hope anybody who managed to last this long, I really thank you for listening, because it's really heavy listening. Yeah. But it needs to be addressed more often, and we need to see Canada as the country it actually is. And again, it's not just, the South is pretty fucking racist. So is the North, and so is Canada. They've all been racist. They're all parts of the same colonizing forces, the same governments. And like I mentioned with UNDRIP, Australia and New Zealand are also places that were colonized by the same mother country who did the same things to their Indigenous people. It's just the way colonization has to survive after a while.
I found the painting.
Make that the thumbnail.
If Kai says it's okay, this guy paid $20,000 for it.
I have a friend who painted a portrait of Trudeau with ram's horns like the devil.
Yes.
Oh, but he's so dreamy.
I mean,
top 10 murdering psychopaths of the world.
All psychopaths are hot though.
Yeah.
All murderers.
I love that conservative, like,
that's how you know Jeff Bezos isn't a murderer. He looks like a penis.
I do love that right-wing conspiracy that Trudeau is Fidel Castro's son. It's the greatest fucking thing.
What?
You're the only one who has talked about that at all. What the fuck are you talking about?
Okay, so apparently, so from what I understand, we can end the episode on a funny note. When Trudeau's father, older Trudeau Senior or whatever, he became prime minister. Apparently, he was like he was in his 50s, his wife was in his 20s, or some crazy shit like that. So like they go on their honeymoon in the Caribbean. And apparently they like officially went to like 8 islands, but they went to a 9th, and the 9th one was Cuba. It later came out to be. And apparently the Trudeaus were very promiscuous. And allegedly there are a bunch of pictures of Fidel Castro and Justin Trudeau's mom like really close, like looking at each other like, hey, hubba hubba. And so like a few like months later, Justin's born. So like the right-wing conspiracy is that like Fidel Castro and Justin Trudeau's son. And like they have like side-by-side pictures of like Justin smiling and then Fidel smiling with both their heads tilted. And they're like, oh, look, it's the same. But like the timing doesn't line up for it to ever be possible. But it's just really funny that people are like, oh, Justin Trudeau is Fidel Castro's son. It's like this right-wing conspiracy to try to slander him when like Justin Trudeau is like just horrible on his own. He does it. Yeah, he's a piece of shit.
Yeah, I remember kind of at the beginning of I Don't Know More, I saw a picture where Justin Trudeau went to the Attawapiskat First Nation, where Chief Teresa Spence, I think at the time, was having a hunger strike. I can't remember exactly what it was for. It might have been the water issue. But she was doing a hunger strike and she was living in a teepee. And this is before Justin Trudeau like officially entered politics. And he went to visit her, and there's pictures of him, looking looking very concerned, sitting in the teepee with Chief Therese Spence. And I remember asking my Canadian friends, who the fuck is this guy? Because he's using this as a photo op, and I know that he's going to try to get something out of this. And lo and behold, a couple of years later, he's elected as prime minister.
That's going to be the thumbnail for the episode. I'm going to find that image. It's going to be Justin Trudeau. Didn't he wear a headdress?
I'm sure he did at some point.
Oh my God, that's going to be that's the thumbnail. It's going to be Justin Trudeau. Oh my God.
Well, thank you guys for listening to that depressing ass show.
Yeah. I don't even want to do the funny outro. I just want to do the land acknowledgement and just be like,
I'm just going to cut it off before you started talking about Justin Trudeau.
Oh my God. Anyway, any other things before I do the outro? Tyler's been silent this entire time. It's crazy.
It's that toothache.
I was wrong. At the beginning of the episode, I was against CRT, but I'm for it.
Are you pro CRT now?
CRT
This is the episode that we need to send to all of the people who are very anti CRT so they can learn. Yeah. This is what you should be pro now.
I agree.
Hit it, Nelson.
At Dixieland, the proletariat believe the South will rise again, but this time for the right reasons. Those being worker-owned means production, decolonization, and self-determination for all oppressed peoples.
Racism.
And depression. Make sure to click on our link tree in the show notes to find all our social media. And if you're very, very lucky, you might even find Tommy on Twitch and get a magical invite to Uncle Tommy's Twitch cabin. It's his name idea, not mine. Please don't cancel me. We are coming to you from the birthplace of the Civil Rights Movement, Montgomery, Alabama, as well as jolly old England. We'd also like to recognize we are recording on occupied land that rightfully belongs to the Muskogee Nation. Tyler, you gonna send us out? Yeah, man. Tell you what, the good Lord willing, and the creek don't rise. We'll see y'all next time.